You're listening to episode 41 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness Practice and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Mindfulness teacher Ed Halliwell joins us to speak about the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group in the United Kingdom. What would it be like if mindfulness were not only an approved therapeutic intervention for some forms of emotional distress, but was being reviewed for inclusion in the government itself? Our friends in the UK are doing just that. Ed Halliwell is a UK-based mindfulness teacher and writer. He is the author of Mindfulness, How to Live Well by Paying Attention, and co-author of The Mindful Manifesto, How Doing Less and Noticing More Can Help Us Thrive in a Stressed-Out World. Ed leads public mindfulness courses, workshops, and retreats in London, Surrey, and Sussex, and has introduced and taught mindfulness in organizations such as Citibank, UNICEF UK, Imperial College Business School, and Ardingly College. Ed is on the faculty of the School of Life in London, and regularly speaks and writes on mindfulness-related topics, most often for The Guardian and Mindful. Our guest today is Ed Halliwell. Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ted. It's nice to be here.
So tell us about your own journey with mindfulness. What's that been like for you? What have you done?
Wow, it's kind of difficult to know quite where to begin with a question like that, because I would say that it's been a hugely transformative journey that also probably is still in its beginning. I first came across meditation. I came across meditation rather than the word mindfulness, because the word was not nearly so much in common currency around about 2001, so 14 years ago now. And I came across it as part of a search for an escape, truth be told, from depression and anxiety and really being lost in my own life. I was a journalist and I was not having a lot of success in my personal relationships. I was stressed out in my job, which was a stressful job. It also wasn't really a job that was in tune with my heart, I would say, although I'm not sure I would have known that at the time. And I was very, very unhappy, and I didn't really know why I was unhappy. I mean, I knew that certain things didn't seem to be working in my life, but I couldn't really find a way of understanding what had happened. Because, I seemed to have, I had a good education, and I in many eyes had a good career, and a reasonably fortunate living situation. And, I had a lot of things that seemed to be going for me. And yet I had this period of nearly 3 years, really, where I was very profoundly depressed and anxious, day after day after day, and it was not a lot of fun. I was desperate to escape that, desperate to find ways in which I could, recover myself. It hadn't always been like that. And as part of that kind of desperate search for escape, I was in psychotherapy, I was going to various support groups, trying all sorts of treatments, conventional and alternative. And sort of along the way, the word meditation came up a few times. I read it in books, and various of the people who I saw as part of trying to help myself out of this mentioned meditation. And the more that I read about it, and the more I read about Buddhism as well, which often came up, the more it seemed to make sense as an idea. I'd say as an idea, because at this point it wasn't a practice. So I was kind of felt like I was being called to try this thing, meditation. And eventually I did. Eventually I went to what was my local meditation center. There weren't really mindfulness courses around at that point. And there was something to it that wasn't there for me in all of the other approaches that I was trying. And I think the most important thing about it that I discovered was that everything else that I was trying, it had this kind of desperation quality to it. It had this grasping quality to it. It had this please get me out of here quality to it. And of course, that please get me out of here quality, I subsequently realized, was a large part of what kept me in the depression and in the anxiety. I was struggling and striving and craving not to be where I was. And that kind of struggle and aversion to my day-to-day experience and moment-to-moment experience was actually perpetuating it. And so meditation was different from the other approaches in that, while I still wanted it to be the quick fix that I was searching for and the sort of miracle cure, it confronted me with my own mind. And I saw something there that I hadn't seen in any of the other approaches that I'd tried. So just in the very act of sitting and noticing what was going on in my mind and body felt different. And so there was something there, some kind of mirror there, some kind of approach that was different from everything else. And so I kept working with it gradually, drinking mindful cups of tea and short mindfulness of breath practices. And over a period of some months, as I kind of familiarized myself with what was going on in me, it was pretty painful. But I don't think it was any coincidence that about sort of 3 or 4 months after beginning a daily practice of meditation, the depression lifted for the first time. And I think it came largely because I stopped struggling with it. I actually came to accept where I was and that it was possible to be with that state of mind and body, unpleasant though it was. And that seemed to change things. So this transformation occurred with meditation, and just, this was completely alien to me. This possibility that you could actually stay present and be with in a kindly, non-struggling way with an unpleasant experience like depression and anxiety. So
you could set down being depressed or anxious about being depressed and anxious.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't kind of like a sort of sudden light bulb moment. There was a kind of moment where it was like, oh, wow, I've realized something. But what did happen as a light bulb, a sort of change moment, was that the depression lifted very suddenly after this long period of time. And I'm sure it was something to do with this capacity to be with what was happening and not fight it anymore. So yes, the letting go of the fight with being depressed seemed to have a big effect on the emergence from that. And it wasn't like I never got depressed again. I did and have, but it was the beginnings of a relationship to my experience that it was so different from where I was before. I had no sense of this possibility of being able to work with your mind and body. So that was how I got to discover this thing called meditation, which then became such an important thing in my life. It was kind of like, wow, this process is quite amazing. Not just because it's helped me, I believed, and still believe, through that experience, but it had applications for every aspect of life. Because, the mind and the body are what we take through our lives. So this way of working with the mind and body, this very simple, not easy, but very simple way of experiencing our minds and bodies, that was not the way that I'd been brought up to experience it, actually changed the entire experience of life. And so, having discovered this, I was kind of prepared to devote myself to it because it was so utterly transformative.
And so you've made a actually some very significant changes. You're very active in social media. You have your own blog, which I'll be linking to on the episode page for this episode. And I enjoy your posts on mindful. And so what made a shift for you from going as a consumer of the practice of mindfulness to producing and encouraging others? What pushed you that extra level?
Yeah, I'm interested by the phrase, a consumer of the practice of mindfulness. It's almost an approach of moving from stopping being a consumer. And I'm not sure what the word would be, but it's almost like a sort of the opposite of being a consumer. But in terms of sort of shift from being a meditation practitioner to a mindfulness teacher and writer, well, I mean, I was always a writer, so that shift came quite naturally. You know, as I was continuing in journalism, my writing started to move into this area because it became so important to me. So I started to write about well-being and be interested in writing about mental health, and meditation naturally came in as an important part of that for me, because it was so personally important. So that was kind of a natural shift over time. Also, I would say that over time it became more important to integrate meditation into the whole of my life. You know, it's kind of a gradual process from sort of that first mindful tea drinking and 5 minutes a day, and then gradually cultivating a practice and deepening a practice, practicing regularly, going on retreats. I lived for a year at the Deschencholing Meditation Center in France. That was also a hugely deepening experience. And when I came back to the UK, I felt like to be really in tune, I needed to find a way of life that was able to incorporate this. At first, that was working with the Mental Health Foundation as a writer and researcher, working on a number of projects, but one project that came out of that was campaigning for mindfulness-based cognitive therapy to be used more widely in the National Health Service here in the UK. And so I learned a lot there about secular mindfulness approaches, if that's the right word for them. And so there was a sort of natural kind of progression from that to then bring together my own experience of meditation over what was by this time 6, 7 or 8 years of practice, and the kind of research work that I was doing to then train as a mindfulness teacher and to kind of start to really integrate this into my working life, and also, you know, in the same way that it was in my own in my personal life. So it was kind of a gradual piecing together of these different aspects that has kind of led me to run mindfulness courses and to be in ongoing training as a mindfulness teacher, and also to continue to write and to work with the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary group, which kind of is a follow-on from the work that I was doing with the Mental Health Foundation. So I feel so privileged that all of these different areas have kind of coalesced, and I'm very lucky to be able to spend so much of my time practicing mindfulness, teaching mindfulness, or working with projects that are helping hopefully bring mindfulness to others.
And that's really what such an important aspect of this work is bringing it to others who may not actually find it without those efforts. So thank you for doing that. And it's my hope that you'll join us again in a different podcast to talk about your 2 books, in particular your new one, Mindfulness, How to Live Well by Paying Attention. But today we're going to speak about something else, the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group. Tell us, what is that? How did that get started?
Well, the driving force behind the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group here in the UK is a Member of Parliament, Chris Rowan, who I first met a few years ago, having connected with him and seen his interest in mindfulness, and he very kindly invited me to meet with him. And he had come across meditation many years ago. He was a school teacher before he was a Member of Parliament, and he rediscovered mindfulness as an MP and saw the potential, I think, for meditation practice, mindfulness, to be of great help in many different areas. So he was and is the driving force behind the All-Party Parliamentary Group. What he did was to campaign amongst his fellow MPs and saying, you know, there is this thing which is potentially very valuable, mindfulness practice. And, this is a pretty kind of amazing thing, I think, for a politician to do, because we're talking about meditation here, and it wasn't so long ago that meditation, was seen in most mainstream situations as being a bit kind of flaky. So he was prepared to stick his neck out. And he also did it in such a way. He didn't try and set up an all-party parliamentary group, to kind of create mindfulness-based policies or advocate for mindfulness. What he realized is that the most important thing was actually to set up a practice group and to give his fellow members of parliament, those who were interested, an opportunity to discover for themselves the potential of mindfulness by trying it out. So he worked with the Oxford Mindfulness Centre to set up classes in Parliament for MPs and Lords who were interested. And he got enough of them there to form a group. And there's now been over 100 MPs and Lords who've been through an 8-week mindfulness course in Parliament. So that's quite an impressive number, I think. From that, several other MPs and Lords have been prepared to put their energy behind mindfulness as a potential way of helping in various policy areas. The Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group has been looking at health, education, at the workplace and the criminal justice system primarily as a starting point. But it was really Chris's work in gathering together his fellow MPs, or many of them, and Lords, encouraging them to come and find out what this was about for themselves, and then allowing them to discover for themselves and to make the connections between their own experience and what might be possible for others. And so I think it was a very skillful way of seeding this, kind of planting a seed in the Houses of Parliament for mindfulness practice. And Chris Cullen, who's one of the founders of the Mindfulness Initiative, and is an associate of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, has been teaching those courses for a few years now for the MPs and the Lords, and now also some of the staff in the Houses of Parliament. So there has been, the Parliament has become a place of mindfulness practice. This happens every week in Parliament, which I still am flabbergasted by. I'm still amazed by here we are in Parliament, and it's sort of one of the most frantic places and, places of conflict and energy and drive and ambition and all of that stuff. And yet here we are every week. Mindfulness is being taught there and practiced there, thanks to Chris Rowan's energy and Chris Cullen's energy in teaching the classes. So that's the kind of the background over the last few years. The Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group has flowered from that. So there are chairs of the group from each of the main political parties here in the UK. So this is an all-party group. It's not from one side of the political spectrum and not from others. But there is this kind of ground now. So from that ground, there are the 3 chairs of the group and many other MPs and Lords who are contributing to the group. And what was decided as the first piece of work was to hold an inquiry into the possibility for mindfulness practice in British society in the areas that I talked about. And that has been clerked by an organisation called the Mindfulness Initiative, which was set up by Chris Cullen and also Madeline Bunting, who's a very well-known and well-respected journalist here in the UK, and also a long-term mindfulness practitioner. So Chris and Madeline set up the Mindfulness Initiative as an advocacy group and as a way of supporting the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group. And Chris and Madeline invited me around about a year ago to come on board with that work. And we've been very fortunate in getting help from some very experienced and talented mindfulness teachers and researchers here in the UK. And so we've been working to hold this inquiry, which has meant a number of hearings in Parliament looking at the potential in these different areas. And the culmination of that work will be to publish a full report on how mindfulness might bring benefits to these 4 areas of British society, and the Mindful Nation UK report, as we're calling it, will be published in June this year.
Wonderful. And it sounds like the academic folks who've been a part of this is Bangor, Exeter, and Oxford. And it sounds like it's the same crowd that has also been so instrumental in the MBI TAC development. Is that correct?
Yeah, when you say TAC, what do you mean by
The teacher assessment criteria.
Oh, yes, yeah, indeed, yes. And I mentioned the 4 key areas of life which the inquiry has looked at. As kind of as a sort of thread through this, the APPG has also been concerned with the integrity of mindfulness teaching and how these practices can be integrated and expanded without them becoming diluted so that they don't do what they can do. Part of that has been looking at how mindfulness is taught. So yes, there's definitely a connection there between teacher training and how mindfulness teachers are developed and the work that the APPG is doing also.
Now, this is within the British political system, tied as it is to Parliament. What kind of challenges does that present that you may have run into?
I have been amazed at the support and enthusiasm and energy that has been created by this process. So I have to say that the kind of obstacles that you might expect in party politics, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as an experienced political person. No, that's not my background. But I've been somewhat surprised and amazed how there is this huge energy from all of the politicians who have been involved. And they're, coming at this from different perspectives, certainly. I wonder if the key to that is their own experience. If you have a look at the interim report that was published last month in January, each of the 3 chairs of the group have spoken about their own personal experience of mindfulness practice, and very movingly in each case, I think. So I think there's this ground that has come from that personal practice, this sense that whatever political viewpoints or, where they're coming from in the political spectrum, they can see and feel the benefits as human beings. So this kind of, maybe, as I say, this is really my only experience of the political process, but I've been really struck by the sense of human connection rather than you sort of imagine sort of political infighting and disagreements and so on. There's been a real strong consensus here.
And I think that ties directly, Ed, and I completely agree with what you're saying, to a phrase you used earlier, which I know some folks have an aversion to, of secular mindfulness. And I think what that use, that phrase, is pointing to that this is a shared human experience, and that the secularity is not an aversion to one's own personal religious beliefs. It isn't. It's simply a recognition that this is based on what we as people experience, and it does not give a presupposition of superiority to one political affiliation to another, one ideological stance to another, one religious belief to another, but that it's something that we all have as human beings. And that's what its tremendous power is and why we're seeing it cross those lines, because it's about us as people rather than us as some other box we can paint ourselves into.
I think that's right. I think the labels and the fixations fall away to some degree, and isn't that part of what practice is all about? It's the falling away of the fixations and the labels, and or at least the recognizing of them, and that there seems to be this being human, and we're all different. We all have our unique experiences and our differences and so on. But there's something which seems to be in common that mindfulness practice speaks to. There's the difficulties of being human, the stresses and the troubles the difficulties that we all face, and that meditation practice, mindfulness, the Dharma, if looking at this from a kind of with Buddhist terminology, that speaks to, and that enables us to embody ourselves and relate with life in a way that's more helpful than not relating with life in that way. At least that's my own experience, and it's what I see working with others as a mindfulness teacher and a fellow practitioner. And it's very much what I see in the politicians. I was really moved at the launch of the interim report in January, where we had all 3 chairs of the APPG on the panel, and each of them spoke really personally about the stresses of being a politician, really humanly, and with recognition of how difficult they found. This is an election year here in the UK. There's going to be an election in a few months. And so they are gearing up for a lot of people to, shout at them and probably tell them how useless they are and what they've done wrong and why they shouldn't still be in a job. And of course, that's all part of the political process. But the humanity that they each brought to being open about how difficult that is and how mindfulness practice helps them to manage that vulnerability. And I was really, really moved by that. And I think, in many ways, if mindfulness is to permeate through society, maybe it will come through testimonies like that more than it will through just outlining of policies. I think the humanizing process of hearing people describe and share their own experience is enormously powerful.
Let's stay on that for a little bit and talking some about the opportunities. With this particular group, this being part of Parliament, what are some doors that this may open for mindfulness?
Possibly one of the most important roles of the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group is to open doors. It's kind of like a galvanizing force. I mean, we are in a world now where it's much less common for people to look at you in a funny way when you say that you practice meditation. It does still happen occasionally.
Now they think of, Time Magazine in 60 Minutes instead of, oh, you're weird.
That's right. Yeah. And there are all sorts of other challenges which arise. I think, in meditation could be seen as a sort of, quick fix or a way to power or, all sorts of other perhaps misconceptions.
Yeah, all of the hype is also another problem that's come up with this surge in awareness of it.
Absolutely, yeah. All of the hype, which can be unhelpful, but I think it's still quite new in many settings, and I think the All-Party Parliamentary Group operates as a galvanizing force. Like if there's something about permission being granted. If MPs are practicing this in the Houses of Parliament, then maybe it's okay for me to practice this in my workplace, to look at how this might be helpful for my patients and clients if I'm a healthcare provider, to explore this in whatever field it is that I'm working in or in my school, if I'm a teacher or a parent. It gives permission to have these conversations in a way that perhaps, even a year or two ago, perhaps those, people might not feel confident enough to have those conversations or trust that they would, maybe they won't still always get a positive response, but it allows these conversations to happen. And it allows people to say, hey, look, the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group is saying that, mindfulness in schools could be a priority for research and development and looking at best practice. And, here's what they're exploring, looking at the integrity of the approaches, and these are the risks and these are the opportunities. And so the fact that this is happening in such a place as Parliament, I think is hugely enabling for those people who might want to bring it into their own different worlds.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ed, that's tremendously valuable, because so far it's been restricted to religious traditions and to academia, to now more and more scientific exploration. And these are all fairly rarefied environments. It's not quite as day to day. And we're seeing it gain a little awareness in things like mindfulness in schools and other programs like that. Seeing it in Parliament, in Tim Ryan, his own Mindful Nation organization here in the U.S., seeing it at that level brings with it a certain at the regular dinner table conversation that we wouldn't otherwise see.
Yeah, I think that's it. At least that's part of it.
So what do you want to see happen as an outcome, or perhaps several outcomes of this group? What would you like to see?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Without wanting to duck the question, my only honest answer here in a way is I don't know. I don't know, because I think possibly another of the most, we talked about how having conversations and discussions are so important. And I think what has happened with the inquiry, with these 8 hearings that have taken place over the last 9 months or so, is there's been a coming together of a huge amount of experience with mindfulness in different arenas. And these conversations are happening and they're very vibrant and energizing. I'm not sure where it's going to go. What I can say is that we are going to produce a report in June that will make some recommendations and will, I hope, explore some of the issues that are coming up, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. As to where it's going to go, it's very much open. What I'm really pleased about is that something is happening. And I think that, in a way, is what's so pleasing, more than there's a kind of prescribed outcome, which I think wouldn't be the most mindful way of approaching this anyway, saying this is the goal we've got to get to. Because, as soon as we start getting into, I think this should happen, we're kind of moving into, imposing mindfulness here and you should be. And that's definitely, in my opinion anyway, that is not the way to go. And in fact, that could very much backfire. So I think this very much is not about trying to impose mindfulness in any area, but, opening dialogues, experimenting and exploring, and seeing what comes out of that. And I think that is how it's happened so far, over the last 35 years since John Kabat-Zinn began working in the, basement at UMass. And I think that's some interesting things have happened so far.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head, that it's the creative exploration, the dialoguing, the inquiry that is itself the valuable outcome of this, and that it can in fact be quite harmful to have a predetermined set of here's what must come out of this and it must look thus. That prevents our creative inquiry.
Indeed. It's a killer of curiosity and openness, and we're back into we're really into fixations again there, and are trying to grasp onto a particular result, which is antithetical to mindfulness. Now, there are all sorts of difficulties along the way, I think, and it means somewhat letting go of control, and there are already many creative disagreements happening, and I think this is a good process to be going through, and I'm sure it will continue. And as long as there's that sense of curiosity and, as you say, inquiry happening, then the sort of trust that I put in this practice, certainly in my own life, I think we can trust. As soon as we try to fix it, then fixes aren't what mindfulness are about, and I think that's what stifles.
So, Ed, what else would you like to share with the listeners in our last few minutes together?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, so I'm just delighted to be with you, and it's been a real pleasure to kind of reflect a little bit, actually, on the work that's been happening in Parliament over the last 9 months. So thank you for helping me to reflect critically on that a little bit. I can't say that I have something sort of that I'm burning to say we must talk about this. You've very kindly allowed me to talk and to sort of let my own mind wander to some degree. So I don't feel that there's something that we haven't covered that I'm burning to say. But if you think if there are any questions that you'd like to set me off again with, then I'd be very happy to be set off.
I guess the one I'd set you off on is, will you come back and speak with us about your 2 books? Because I'd like to have you on again to talk about that.
I'd be delighted to, Ted. Yes, of course.
Well, everyone, our guest today has been Ed Halliwell, and I'll be linking to these addresses on the episode page for this episode, edhalliwell.com, and his blog, edhalliwell.blogspot.co.uk. I'll also be linking to the interim report on the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group findings that just came out very recently, so I'll put that on this episode page as well. Our guest, Ed Halliwell. Ed, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.